I'm going to give you defense, quarterback, and tight end rankings this week. Starting at tight end, all you need is about 5 points to have a mid-tight end one nowadays. It is disgusting. Our tier 1 will be McBride and Kittle. These are really the only players that I feel super confident with, right? I mean, both good offenses. In the case of George Kittle, obviously, this is much higher than he's been ranked all year. But in the case of George Kittle, you now no longer have Deebo Samuel. If you look at the splits with and without Deebo Samuel for Kittle, dating back over the past 3 seasons, no lie, George Kittle almost doubles his points per game in games with no Deebo Samuel in comparison to games with Deebo. The reason for this is kind of simple. If you look at where these players operate on the football field, they're kind of similar. Low average depth of target options that are going to pick up a ridiculous amount of yards after the catch. And here, when you have no Deebo, those targets more so get funneled over to George Kittle rather than they do Brandon Ayuk. At least that's what we've historically seen. Now, I know maybe somebody's going to say, well, Mason, with no Deebo, with no CMC, what stops this offense from falling apart? Well, you have a couple different factors. One, this Rams defense is dealing with a ton of injuries in their own right. 2, y'all know I am one to believe that sportsbooks, they know more than you do. They know more than I do. They are right more than they are wrong. And they have the Niners with one of the highest implied team totals of any team in the NFL this week with 27 points. So I think George Kittle is set up to absolutely crush. There's a small part of me that actually wants to put George Kittle at tight end 1 overall this week. Now, dropping down to our tier 2 options, we have Kelsey, Laporta, Kincaid, and Bowers. Now, with Kelsey, Laporta, Kincaid, they're all very scary if you drafted them in the early rounds this year. And yes, I drafted Sam Laporta both in round 4 of the Flock League and in a ton of underdog drafts in round 4. And I'm terrified with Laporta. You had 3 targets last week in a game where Jared Goff had 55 pass attempts. That is scary. That is terrifying. Now, with Laporta, I still believe that he is a very talented tight end. I'm not going to be completely abandoning the ship 2 weeks into the season. And I still believe that this Detroit Lions offense is one of the best offenses in the league. They should be playing in the highest scoring game in the NFL this week. The total in this Arizona-Detroit game is over 50 points. I want as many Lions and Cardinals as I can get in my lineup. So yes, we will have Laporta in this tier. With Kelsey, he's been very bad as well. I actually had Kelsey ranked behind Laporta coming into the season. But the thing is, now that you have no Pacheco, I actually wouldn't be surprised if we see this offense skew a little bit more pass happy, where if you're looking at neutral game environments, this has been one of the run heaviest teams in the NFL, both through the first 2 weeks this season. And we saw glimpses of this same thing at the end of last season, where the Chiefs realized, oh, okay, yeah, we have a great defense. Mahomes isn't going to make mistakes. Let's play defense. Let's run the ball and let's win a Super Bowl that way. Without Pacheco, maybe they can't go that heavy into the run. So I do think I bump Kelsey over Laporta. With Kincaid at 5, I know Kincaid's been really bad. Even last week, you actually saw the snaps and the routes run dip down, but that was because Kincaid had to get taken out of the game to be evaluated for a concussion. It was a complete blowout. I expect this to be a much closer contest between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Bills, where Josh Allen has more than 168 passing yards and Kincaid is on the field more often. And then obviously Brock Bowers at 6 has been a massive, massive riser. If you go to flockfantasy.com and look at my rest of season rankings, I actually do have Brock Bowers up to tight end 4 in our rest of season ranks. He is crushed through the first 2 weeks. This game against Carolina, maybe not the best environment, where the Raiders are favored by about a touchdown. So this may be one of the very few games where the Raiders are actually able to run the ball. Obviously, last week, there was a ridiculous amount of passing volume, both to Adams and Bowers, but that was because they had to completely abandon the run against Baltimore, and instead they just had Gardner Minshew drop back every single chance he had. This one may be a little bit tougher to project that out. Now, going down to our next tier, we're going to have Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, and Dallas Goedert. I was surprised to see Likely have such a small role in terms of the 12 personnel split in this offense. After week 1, I thought that they were going to get Isaiah Likely out there for just as much as Mark Andrews going into the future, but Likely only ran a route on about 50% of Lamar Jackson dropbacks. I think that does cement Mark Andrews as the tight end 1 in this offense. With Kyle Pitts, it is very concerning now that we have seen him with his third quarterback in his NFL career just not really get any target volume. The snaps are significantly higher than they were with Arthur Smith, with the departure of Jonnu Smith. So with Pitts, I still view him as a top 10 option. It's a tough matchup going up against KC. But yeah, I mean, the issue is there's just nobody exciting off the waiver. Dallas Goedert here at 9. If you are looking at Dallas Goedert, this is a tight end that I am actually going to have lower than this in our rest of season rankings. But in the short term, I think that he's in a decent situation where you have no A.J. Brown in this offense. With no A.J. Brown in this offense, we actually also got to see that Jahan Dotson is pretty much nothing here. So if they are going to funnel targets, it pretty much has to be done just through Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert. And then our next tier, Jake Ferguson, I'm assuming is playing obviously in these rankings. Honestly, if we knew that he was 100% good to go right now, I actually may move Jake Ferguson a little bit higher here. The issue is I don't necessarily want to rank him up ahead of guys like Pitts and Goddard. And then all of a sudden he's a part-time player. He's active, but he's not 100% viable. So I'll be a little more cautious. Isaiah Likely as our next guy. If you are looking at Likely, super disappointing to see how this coaching staff used him in week 2. Based off how damn good he was week 1, I would assume, hey, get as much 12 personnel as you can out there. Have both Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely out there on the field together for every single snap. Give Likely 75% of the routes here on Lamar Jackson dropbacks. I would love to see it, but honestly, the projections are even saying that it's just unlikely. If you're going over and looking at the underdog pick'em for Isaiah Likely this week, you have Likely higher, lower 31.5 receiving yards. And honestly, I can't even say that I would want the higher on that. But if you did, you could find that link in the description or comment section to go check out Underdog Fantasy. If you use promo code FLOCK when you sign up to Underdog, you're going to be getting a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you're going to be getting a free CeeDee Lamb pick, more than less than half a total yard for the Sunday game, and a free Patrick Mahomes special pick, more than less than half a total yard for the Sunday games. Just make sure you use code FLOCK so you get both special picks and you get a free team review from yours truly in a live stream that we are hosting every single night on this channel. Now, going over to our next tight end, we are going to have Mike Gesicki. Now, honestly, I want to be extremely overweight all Cincinnati Bengals this week. Like I said, I think the Bengals come out and they absolutely crush on Monday night against Washington. Personally, I'm expecting that you have a top 3 offense in total points scored. Right now, if you're looking at implied team totals, the Bengals are right up there with the Detroit Lions as the highest projectable offense this week. With Gesicki, he dominated last week. The issue is we don't necessarily know if this will be a situation in which T. Higgins plays or not. And also with Mike Gesicki, we actually had 2 other tight ends having viable roles here for Cincinnati, which does make things a little concerning. Now, our next guy will be Zach Ertz. If you're looking at Zach Ertz, my issue with this is he's old, he's gross. You don't have the yards after the catch ability. You don't have the touchdown upside. You do have the safe projectable target volume, though, just because Jaden Daniels has been dumping the ball down pretty much every single drop back. But obviously, Zach Ertz will have a short shelf life, knowing that Ben Sinnott is on this offense, who we'd assume has the job by the end of the season. Pat Freiermuth will be our next guy. If you're actually looking at Pat Freiermuth with the underdog pick'ems, they have him at higher, lower 2.5 receptions. The projections are extremely low on him. The reason for this is one of the worst offenses in the NFL, one of the lowest volume passing attacks in the NFL, and Pat Freiermuth is actually now kind of a committee tight end splitting with Darnell Washington. Now, we're putting Taysom Hill here. I have no idea if Taysom Hill is going to play or not. Obviously, I'll be updating these rankings pretty much every single day on flockfantasy.com. So if Taysom is cleared and he looks like he's going to have his normal role, I actually wouldn't mind jumping him up to 12. Dalton Schultz will be our next guy. If you are looking at Schultz, I wouldn't be surprised if actually we get more passing volume for CJ Stroud this week if Joe Mixon were to miss. But clearly, Schultz is the 4th option at best here. And Nico Collins dominating with 25-30% of this team's target share. With viable wide receiver 2 and 3 options in this offense, doesn't make Schultz super appealing. Now, Colby Parkinson was a horrible play last week. Colby Parkinson was just garbage. Now, the thing is, now you have no Kupp. Now you have no Puka Nacua. You have nobody in this offense. Higbee obviously is on the IR or the PUP, but regardless, Parkinson is a tight end that you can still look to because he has the opportunity with a good quarterback, but it should be a very low scoring offense and he doesn't really look exciting. And then Cade Otton will be our last tight end here. Good Bucs offense, but ultimately everything's being funneled through Evans and Godwin. I mean, Kate Otten gave you a goose egg last week. Now let's go over to our next list. This will be quarterback. We're going to start off with Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson. Stupid simple here. If you have one of these quarterbacks, you play them. If you have two of these quarterbacks somehow that are in this tier and it's not a super flex league, then for the love of God, go throw them out on the trade block and see if we can sell one for an elite level wide receiver or running back. You don't need two of these guys. You shouldn't be making decisions here. Start set. Our next tier is going to be Patrick Mahomes and Kyler Murray. I am actually confident to see the Mahomes passing volume increase in comparison to what it has been with no Pacheco. You can go ahead and you can see this with the underdog pick'ems right now, where right now Patrick Mahomes has played 2 games, and in those games, he's had 25 and 28 pass attempts. Right now on underdog, you actually have Patrick Mahomes more than less than 35 and a half passing attempts against the Atlanta Falcons. They are projecting this Chiefs offense to be significantly more pass happy than what it's been through the first 2 weeks. I think that makes sense with 1, natural regression. You do have Patrick Mahomes, probably throw the ball a little bit more. And 2, the Isaiah Pacheco injury kind of fueling this. Now, I do want to remind you, use code FLOCK and underdog so you get the Mahomes more than less than half a total yard for Sunday night. Now, going over to our next guy, we'll be looking at Kyler Murray here. With Kyler Murray going up against the Detroit Lions, this is a situation in which I think it's a super high scoring game environment. Should be the highest scoring game of the week, while at the same time, we know that Kyler Murray has the rushing upside that some of these quarterbacks don't. Obviously, he looked phenomenal against the Rams last week. I do think you probably have him coming back down to earth just a bit. I think the real Kyler Murray is probably halfway between what you had with the Bills and the Rams. The Rams were dealing with a considerable amount of injuries. But I mean, this should be a shootout with the Lions. Our next tier, this will be the highest that we have ranked Joe Burrow for all season. He is 265 and a half passing yards, higher or lower over there on Underdog Fantasy. And if we are looking at Joe Burrow against Washington, this is the best matchup that you could ever ask for. Obviously, you don't have a lot of rushing upside. Obviously, we want T. Higgins good to go for this game. If T. Higgins does miss, then I think you drop Joe Burrow behind CJ Stroud. You drop Joe Burrow behind Anthony Richardson. But right now, I'm operating on the assumption that Higgins will be good to go Monday night. Now, CJ Stroud will be our next guy. I think Stroud's in a similar situation as Mahomes, and that we should see the passing volume actually increase if Joe Mixon were to miss. Right now, if you go ahead and look at the passing attempts that you've had from CJ Stroud through the first 2 weeks, you've had 36 and 32 passing attempts, but only 260 and 232 passing yards. If you look at underdog pick'ems right now, they actually have CJ Stroud at 265 and a half passing yards, higher or lower. Projects out to be the best game that Stroud's had all year. You still have Nico, presumably healthy for this contest. You have Tank Dell. You have Stephon Diggs. So I expect you have no issue to pivot this over to a very pass-happy team. Then our next quarterback will be Anthony Richardson. With Richardson, obviously has been very bad. The passing volume really isn't there either. Richardson's only had 416 passing yards this season. But the reason you start Anthony Richardson is not for the passing production. Anthony Richardson, through the first 2 weeks here, has already gone over 100 rushing yards and the rushing touchdown. Obviously more appealing in that 4-point passing touchdown format where we're more so leaning on rushing production. And we can kind of say the same thing with Jaden Daniels. With Daniels versus Richardson, I still want to give the edge to A-Rich. One, if you're looking at the implied team totals, sportsbooks are currently telling us that we're going to have more points scored in Indy in comparison to what we have in Washington. And 2, I just personally believe that you have more rushing touchdown upside with Anthony Richardson than you do Jaden Daniels. This is despite Daniels having 2 rushing touchdowns this year. But I think if you're looking at the size comparison between these two quarterbacks, you have Richardson more so profiling to be like the Josh Allen. Jaden Daniels more so profiling to be the Lamar Jackson. Now, obviously, we're operating with extremely limited samples with these quarterbacks, so this could easily change going into the future. Our next quarterback is going to be Jared Goff going up against Arizona. This is kind of the tier of guys that you're not going to see any rushing production from. So you're just trying to guess who has the passing touchdowns, who has the passing volume in general. I think Goff is the best bet for that given this matchup and the overall projections. Looking at Brock Purdy, I am starting Brock Purdy this week. It feels horrible. I really don't want to. But going up against the Rams, it's a great matchup. The main concern I have, of course, is that you just may see Jordan Mason running the ball over and over and over again. But you do have a 27-point implied team total. If you go over and look at the projections on Underdog, right now Brock Purdy is higher lower, 227.5 passing yards. So to be honest with you, I actually may end up having to pivot here. My other quarterback in the flock league is Caleb Williams. There's no way in hell I can start Caleb, however. So I may end up having to drop Caleb and pick up another one of these quarterbacks that we're looking at. Baker Mayfield will be our next quarterback here at 12. To be honest with you, I'm going to move Baker ahead of Brock Purdy in these rankings. I think it's a mistake to have Purdy there at 11. Purdy needs to fall down to 13. I'll update those on the site right this second. And yeah, I think Purdy needs to fall behind Dak Prescott as well, because Dak going up against Baltimore, actually, they are dogs in this matchup where we are going to assume that Dallas has to throw the ball in the second half. Should be a very high scoring game as well. This is the second highest over under of any game in the NFL this week, only behind the Cardinals and the Lions. Now our next tier, we're going to have a bunch of miscellaneous players here. We have Justin Fields for the rushing upside and just the rushing upside here at 14. Obviously, the passing volume is going to be disgusting. If you actually look at Justin Fields this season, though, obviously the fantasy production hasn't been there because you've only had 1 passing touchdown and 0 rushing touchdowns. Now, Geno Smith will be our next guy. With Geno, I think you're more excited if Kenneth Walker misses. Based off what we saw this offense do, completely abandon the run with no Kenneth Walker in the last game, but we'll see what happens this one. Trevor Lawrence will be our next guy at 16. If you are looking at Trevor Lawrence going up against the Buffalo Bills, he has been disappointing. You have no Evan Ingram. It's a tough matchup. I'm not excited. Kirk Cousins, I'm not really excited to start going up against the Chiefs. Really tough matchup. You have no rushing upside whatsoever. Yeah, you'll probably have to throw the ball in the second half, but who knows if you can move the ball down the field. Sam Darnold at 18 has been very good, but at the time of this recording, we don't know the availability of Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson. So if one or potentially 2 of these receivers miss, I'm definitely concerned about Sam Darnold. I understand he's looked phenomenal through the first 2 weeks, but ultimately he is Sam Darnold. I know people hate when I say that. Gardner Minshew and Caleb Williams will be our next 2 quarterbacks. Minshew has a great matchup going up against Carolina. You should be able to move the ball down the field, but also at the same time, we should also see a ton of rushing production in Las Vegas in comparison to what we've seen in the past. Now, going over to the defensive rankings here, we are going to have the Cleveland Browns in their own tier this week going up against the New York Giants. The Giants have the lowest implied team total of any team in the NFL with 16 points. The Cleveland Browns have a very strong defense. I think that's going to be an embarrassing spot for Daniel Jones. We know that going into last week, Daniel Jones had more passing touchdowns to the opposing defense than he did to his own team on his new contract. Obviously, this last week that did change that, but still ultimately a situation where I think you want to fade Jones. You want to be on the good defense. I'm very, very happy to have Cleveland this week. I'm going over to our number 2 option. We will have the Raiders. And honestly, I may end up picking up the Raiders off the waiver wire in the flock league right now, because if I'm looking at the schedule for this Raiders defense going into the future, this week they get to go up against the Panthers. Next week, they get to go up against the Browns. The week after, they get to go up against the Broncos. And the week after that, they get to go up against the Steelers. You have about a month-long stretch where the Raiders should consistently be a top 5 defense. Our number 3 defense will be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going up against the Broncos. Obviously, Bo Nix has looked like one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL. I hope that he is able to improve. I mean, it's not fun just having these garbage offenses in the league, but we'll see. I mean, he's shown no promise so far. We'll have the Pittsburgh Steelers here at 4 going up against the Chargers. I understand, yes, the Chargers have been phenomenal so far this season, but actually the Chargers have an implied team total of only 17 points this week. Justin Herbert was banged up. Sounds like Herbert's going to play, but ultimately this is a great Steelers defense. While the Chargers have been very good, they played the Raiders and the Panthers. So I think this will be their first test against a good defense. Then after that, we'll actually have the Chargers defense going up against the Steelers, where you're getting Justin Fields. The Chargers have played great defense. And if you are looking right now at sportsbooks, this game only has an over-under of about 35.5 points. So it should be one of the lowest scoring games in the NFL this week. We are actually going to move the Niners ahead of the Chargers here, because the Niners are going up against the Rams. Not only do they go up against the Rams, but the Rams currently have 5 offensive linemen on the IR. They have their 2 top receivers on the IR. There's a spread in this game of almost 9 points. The Niners should be able to crush the Rams. The Rams are going to have a very difficult time moving the ball down the field. So, that's why I have a hard time picking up the Raiders DST right now in the Flock League, just because I have the Niners. So it's do I really want to roster 2 defenses? And then we'll have the Chargers going up against the Steelers, super low scoring game environment. Dropping down a tier, we are going to have the defenses against backup quarterbacks. We're going to have the Titans going up against the Packers. We're going to have the Seahawks going up against the Dolphins. Now, of course, a massive asterisk on this Tennessee Titans defense. If you end up having to play Jordan Love instead of Malik Willis, abandon ship. And then at that point, you want to go through and you want to bench the Titans defense. It will be a bloodbath. But if you have Malik Willis, I know it's a Malik Willis revenge game. I'm not buying it. I think Tennessee crushes. I'm going over to our next tier. We're going to have Cincinnati, Green Bay. I'd actually like the Green Bay Packers defense a little bit more if Love plays. That way Tennessee's having to drop back a ton with Will Levis. We have Buffalo. We have Kansas City. I think Kansas City actually is one of the better defenses on this list. But against the Atlanta Falcons, the Falcons do have a 21.5 point implied team total. Dropping down to our next tier, we're going to have the Indianapolis Colts, the New York Giants, the Houston Texans, the Bears. The Colts get to play the Bears. The Bears get to play the Colts. It should be a lower scoring game environment with plenty of quarterback mistakes. The Giants get to play Deshaun Watson and the Browns. The issue is the spread on this game is going to be massive. Houston gets to play Sam Darnold. The Texans defense will be much higher than this if Jefferson does miss this game. And then our last tier, honestly, those are defenses that you should not be playing. If you have them, I would just stream and look for a better option. But I think that's all I have for you. Really hope that I'm able to help you out here. And if I did, go down there, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And if you want the CeeDee Lamb and Patrick Mahomes free picks for Sunday, you can find those over on Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code FLOCK when you sign up to Underdog. So you get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you will get a free team review through flockfantasy.com. Those free picks. But if you want that free team review, just make sure you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your Underdog account. That way I can credit you with your free team review voucher and break down that team for you in a live stream. But thank you again. I really do appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day and really hope I get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.